The marketplace was alive with noise, but in one corner, silence fell heavy. Stalls shouted about spices, weapons, and bright fabrics, yet in that shadowed place, only a thin voice rose. A woman, her skin pale and cracked, sank to her knees on the dusty stone. Her child clung to her skirt, small hands shaking, his cheeks hollow from hunger. She pressed her forehead low, her voice trembling like a dying flame. "Please, may I have the leftovers? Just a little for my child." No one moved. The crowd, made of dozens of species, kept their distance. Some lowered their eyes, ashamed to look, while others smirked, enjoying the cruelty. Her plea carried through the air, louder than the merchant's calls. A beggar in this district was a curse. To beg was to break the law, to invite the guards. Everyone knew it. Everyone feared it. The human heard her voice before he saw her. He had been walking slowly, carrying a box of supplies, his dark jacket dusty from travel. His eyes scanned the stalls, and then stopped when he saw her. She was not begging for herself. Her eyes did not search for pity. They were fixed only on her child. The boy was no older than 5, his lips cracked, his tiny ribs visible through thin clothes. The human's steps slowed, and the box in his arms grew heavier. He stopped. The woman lifted her head, and their eyes met. Her gaze was not desperate, it was broken. A look of someone who had already begged many times and been turned away again and again. "Please," she whispered again, softer this time, almost afraid of her own words. 3 days. No food. He will not last another night. A murmur swept through the people standing nearby. Some shook their heads quickly and walked away faster, not wanting to be caught in the scene. Others lingered, waiting, their expressions curious. They were not looking at the woman. They were looking at the human. The only human in the marketplace. He knew it, too. He could feel the weight of their eyes pressing down. He glanced at the crate he carried. Inside were ration bars, hard bread, dried fruits meant for long journeys. He could take one, just one, and hand it to her. It would mean nothing to him. But here, in this place, it would mean everything. His fingers twitched at the thought, but he did not move yet. He could already sense the danger forming around him. A sudden sound broke the silence. Laughter. Sharp, mocking laughter. 2 guards stood at the edge of the crowd, their armor dull, but their eyes cruel. They were tall, with hooked mouths that curled into sneers. "A beggar," one spat. Again. The other guard smacked the end of his spear against the ground, making the child flinch. "We told you before. Begging is forbidden. You should know your place." The woman bowed lower, dragging her child down with her, her voice shaking. "Please, just the scraps. Just for him." The first guard moved closer and kicked the empty bowl she held. It skittered across the ground, clattering loudly against stone. The crowd tensed, but no one spoke. No one dared. The human's jaw tightened. He set the crate down at his feet, slow and deliberate. His hand rested on the edge, fingers brushing over the lid. The guards noticed. Their laughter faded. One stepped forward, glaring. "Don't," he warned. "You will regret it." The woman shook her head at the human, her eyes wide with fear. She was not asking him to save her. She was begging him to walk away, to stay safe. She had already decided she would take the punishment. Better her than him. But the child, too tired to understand fear, stared at the box by the human's feet. His tiny hands reached out weakly, as if the food inside was a dream he could almost touch. A strange stillness filled the air. The market's noise faded, as though the world itself was holding its breath. The human looked down at the boy's hand, small and trembling, and something inside him shifted. The fear, the weight of the crowd, the silent warning of the guards, all of it fell away. His chest tightened with a cold anger. He bent down and unlatched the crate. The sound was soft, yet it cut through the marketplace like thunder. Every head turned. Every whisper died. Slowly, he pulled out a piece of bread, plain and rough, and held it in his hand. The woman's lips parted, her eyes filling with tears. She shook her head harder now, mouthing words with no sound. "No, please, don't." She knew what would come if he gave it. But the child, his eyes wide and wet, reached again, and this time the human's hand lowered toward him. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The guards stiffened, rage flashing across their faces. The human could already see their weapons shifting, their feet stepping closer. He knew this act was not simple. To give bread was not charity, it was rebellion. Yet he did not look away. His eyes stayed locked on the boy's face. The child's fingers brushed the bread, clutching it clumsily. His lips parted, and he bit into it hungrily, chewing with quiet whimpers. The woman broke, her hands covering her face as tears streamed down. The marketplace erupted, not with cheers, not yet, but with sharp whispers that spread like fire. The guards moved, fury in their steps. The human straightened, his hand curling into a fist. Around them, the people shifted, uneasy, as though the ground itself was about to crack open. Something irreversible had just been set in motion. The human knew it, the guards knew it, and deep down, so did everyone else. The bread was still in the child's hands when the guards stepped closer. Their boots struck the stone with heavy thuds, making the woman flinch each time. One guard's eyes narrowed, his long tongue flicking across sharp teeth as he snarled. "Give it back." His voice was low, but carried like a blade through the crowd. The other guard raised his spear, pointing the metal tip at the woman's chest. "You broke the law. Begging is forbidden. Feeding a beggar is worse." The child froze, his small body trembling, but he clung to the bread with both hands. He tried to take another bite, but the guard's shadow loomed over him, blocking the little sunlight in the square. The woman reached out, trying to cover her son, whispering desperately, "Eat quickly, please, before they—" Her words cut off when the spear pressed closer. She gasped and lowered her head to the ground, begging for mercy. "Punish me. Not him. Please, he is only a child." The human did not move at first. He stood tall, eyes locked on the guards, his jaw tight. The crowd around them held its breath. They had seen scenes like this before. Beggars beaten, children dragged away, punishments given in public to keep others silent. But this time, it was different. This time, a human was involved, and everyone was watching to see what he would do. The first guard sneered and held out his clawed hand. "The bread." Now. His tone carried mockery, as if daring the human to resist. "Food belongs to those who serve the order, not to rats crawling in the dirt." He shoved the woman aside with his boot, making her stumble to the ground. The child cried out, clutching the bread tighter. The human's eyes followed that small cry. Something inside him hardened. Slowly, he crouched down and steadied the boy, helping him to sit upright. He brushed the dust from the child's shoulder and kept his hand there, protective and firm. Then, without looking at the guards, he said in a calm, steady voice, "He keeps the bread." A wave of murmurs ran through the crowd. They weren't loud, but they carried an edge of surprise. The guards froze, not expecting defiance, their faces twisted with rage. The one with the spear jabbed forward, stopping just short of the human's chest. "Do you dare speak against the law of this city?" His voice rose, sharp and violent. "You will regret this insolence." The human slowly stood, now face to face with the guards. His frame was not massive like theirs, yet there was something in his stance that made the air heavy. His gaze did not waver. He didn't speak again, but the silence itself was an answer. The guard laughed, though the sound carried a hint of unease. He turned to the crowd, gesturing toward the human. "Look at this fool. One scrap of bread, and he risks his life. You think he's brave? He's just a weak outsider. He bleeds like anyone else." He looked back, his grin cruel. "When he screams, remember this moment." The second guard moved toward the crate of food by the human's feet. He kicked it hard, making the lid crack open, dried rations spilling onto the ground. "This will feed the officers tonight," he sneered. He bent down to grab the supplies, his hand reaching greedily. The human's hand shot out, catching the guard's wrist in midair. The crowd gasped. The guard's smile vanished as he tried to pull free, but the human's grip was unyielding. His knuckles tightened, and a vein stood out in his arm. The guard grunted in pain, his knees buckling as he dropped to the ground. The first guard growled and shoved his spear closer, but the human twisted, yanking the captured wrist until a loud snap echoed in the air. The guard screamed, his hand hanging limp. The spear wielder hesitated, his eyes widening in shock. No one in the marketplace had ever dared fight back. The people stirred uneasily, whispers spreading faster now. "Did you see? He broke the guard's arm. A human, standing against them? Is he mad, or is he truly unafraid?" Fear mingled with something else, something long buried, hope. The woman pulled her child closer, shielding him with her arms. Her lips moved in silent prayers, her eyes darting between the guards and the human. She could not believe what she had seen. No one ever defied the enforcers. No one. The first guard snarled, his spear shaking in his hand. His pride screamed louder than his fear. You'll die for this. He lunged, thrusting the weapon straight at the human's chest. The crowd cried out, some turning their faces away, unable to watch what they thought would be blood spilled across the stones. But the human sidestepped smoothly, his hand snapping out to grab the shaft of the spear. He wrenched it free in one sharp motion, the guard stumbling forward in surprise. The human swung the weapon low, smashing the butt of it against the guard's knee. A crack followed, and the guard collapsed to the ground, howling in pain. The spear clattered once against the stone before the human caught it firmly in both hands. He stood over the fallen guards, the weapon now his. The crowd was silent, the moment frozen in disbelief. For years, these enforcers had ruled through fear. Now, in the space of a heartbeat, a human had stripped that fear away. The guards whimpered on the ground, clutching their broken limbs, their armor dented, their pride shattered. The human looked down at them, then back at the mother and child. The boy was still holding the bread, crumbs on his lips, his eyes wide with awe. The woman's tears ran freely down her cheeks. The human lifted the spear high, then slammed its point into the ground beside the broken crate. The sound echoed across the marketplace like thunder. He spoke at last, his voice sharp enough to carry to every corner. Food is for the hungry, not for tyrants. The silence that followed was different from before. It was not fear. It was the silence of people who had seen something impossible and were beginning to believe it might happen again. The guards lay groaning on the ground, their pride broken more than their bones, but the human knew the fight was not finished. Around him, the marketplace was alive with whispers. Faces peeked from behind stalls, some filled with awe, some with fear. Children tugged at their parents' sleeves, asking questions that no one dared answer. The air was heavy, as if the whole city was waiting for his next move. The mother sat trembling, clutching her child tightly. She looked up at him with wide, tear-filled eyes and whispered, "Go, please leave us. If you stay, they will kill you. They will kill all of us." Her voice was not ungrateful. It was desperate, born of years of punishment and fear. She believed no one could stand against the system that ruled them. She believed this man's kindness would cost his life. The human bent down, meeting her gaze directly. His face was calm, but his eyes burned with something fierce. "If I walk away now," he said softly, "he starves tomorrow, and the next child after him, and the next." He glanced at the boy, who was still holding the bread in both hands as though it might vanish at any moment. The child chewed slowly, staring at the human like he was more than a man, like he was a miracle. The crowd stirred. No one stepped forward yet, but the whispers grew. Some were afraid. He'll bring death on us all. Others sounded different. He gave food. He stood against them. Maybe we can too. It was not yet a roar, but it was a spark. And sparks, once seen, were hard to stamp out. One of the fallen guards groaned and pulled himself upright, clutching his bent spear as a crutch. Blood dripped from his mouth as he spat at the ground. "You think you can fight us all, human?" he hissed. "This is only the beginning. The overseers will hear of this. They will come for you." His voice cracked with pain, but there was still venom in it. He wanted to frighten the crowd back into silence. The human turned his head slowly, fixing the guard with a steady gaze. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The silence was sharper than any words. The guard faltered, his threats dying on his lips. For the first time in years, perhaps in his whole life, he felt afraid of someone who stood unarmed. The woman tugged at the human's sleeve, still begging him to run. Her hands shook as she whispered, "Please don't throw your life away for us. They'll crush you like they crushed everyone else." But the human's gaze swept across the faces in the crowd. He saw the mothers hiding scraps of food in their clothes, the children too weak to cry anymore, the fathers with clenched jaws but lowered eyes. He saw more than hunger. He saw chains, invisible but heavier than iron. He took a deep breath, straightened his back, and said in a voice just loud enough for the nearest people to hear, "No child should beg for food. Not here. Not anywhere." His words carried through the murmurs like drops of fire into dry grass. A woman at the edge of the crowd gasped, then lowered her head quickly, afraid of what might happen if anyone thought she agreed. But she could not unhear the words. None of them could. The boy, crumbs still on his lips, leaned against his mother's side, his eyes already closing as sleep pulled him down. He had eaten just enough to ease his pain, but his small body sagged with exhaustion. The human looked at him, then back at the broken guards. His choice was already made. He would not walk away. Another group of guards appeared at the far end of the square, drawn by the noise. Their polished armor gleamed in the fading light, and their weapons were sharp and ready. The crowd shifted nervously, some backing away, afraid of being caught in the storm about to break. The mother whimpered and pulled her child close again, hiding her face against his small shoulder. The human felt the weight of the decision pressing harder now. He could still leave, vanish into the alleys, save himself before the net closed around him. The guards would punish the woman and child, yes, but he would live. Or he could stay, stand firm, and face the fury that was coming. His heart pounded, but his hands were steady. The new guards shouted, ordering the crowd to disperse. "Go back to your homes. There is nothing to see here." Their voices cracked like whips, but the people did not move as quickly as before. They lingered, their eyes darting between the enforcers and the lone human standing tall with nothing but courage in his hands. The human picked up the broken spear from the ground. He didn't raise it in threat. Instead, he leaned it against the crate, almost as if to say he did not need it. He looked around once more at the people, then at the frightened mother. He gave her a small, steady nod, a promise without words. The woman shook her head, tears falling freely. She didn't understand why he was doing this, why he would risk so much for strangers. But the boy stirred in her arms, his small fingers still curled around the bread. He mumbled softly in his sleep, a sound like peace. And for the first time in years, her heart felt something other than despair. The human squared his shoulders as the guards advanced, their boots striking the stone with heavy rhythm. He could hear the crowds breathing, quick and uneven, like an army waiting for someone to lead them. And though he stood alone, he no longer felt alone. The choice was clear. He would not turn away. The guards sneered as they closed in, weapons raised high. The crowd's whispers grew sharper, louder, filling the air with tension. Everyone waited, not for the guards, but for him. For the human who had done what none of them dared to do. For the man who had given bread when everyone else gave silence. And in that moment, before the clash began, a truth spread across the square. This was no longer about one woman, one child, or even one loaf of bread. This was about all of them. This was about what came next. The guards marched forward with heavy steps, their weapons glinting under the dim market lights. Their voices barked orders for the crowd to move aside, but the people hesitated, their feet rooted to the ground. Some pulled their children close, others pressed themselves against the stalls, but no one truly left. Everyone wanted to see what would happen. Everyone wanted to see if the human would still stand. The mother's breath came in short gasps as she pulled her child into her arms. Her whole body shook, and she kept whispering into the boy's ear, "Don't look, don't look." The boy was too tired to answer, his eyes half closed from exhaustion, but he still clung stubbornly to the bread. His small hand would not let it go. The human stepped forward, closing the space between himself and the advancing guards. His shadow stretched across the stone, long and thin, but his stance was steady. He carried no shield, no armor, just the weight of defiance in his eyes. The guards saw it, and though they laughed, there was a nervous edge beneath the sound. One guard with silver markings on his helmet, clearly the leader of this new squad, stepped out first. His voice was loud, sharp, and meant to frighten. "You dare strike officers of the order? You dare feed a beggar in public? Human, you've chosen death." He slammed the tip of his spear against the ground, sparks flying from the impact. The sound echoed across the marketplace. The human did not answer. He reached down and picked up the broken spear he had taken earlier. Its shaft was cracked, its tip dulled, but he held it easily in his hands. He didn't raise it to attack. He simply planted it into the ground beside him, as if marking the spot he would not leave. His silence was heavier than words. The leader snarled at the display and raised his hand. At once, two guards rushed forward, weapons lifted high. The first swung low, aiming for the human's legs, while the second thrust straight for his chest. Gasps rose from the crowd, and the mother covered her child's face, unwilling to let him see what she believed would be the man's final moment. But the human moved with startling speed. He sidestepped the first strike, his hand catching the weapon shaft, just twisting it sharply until the guard lost his grip. In the same motion, he pushed the weapon into the second attacker's path, blocking the thrust meant for his chest. The two guards stumbled into each other, crashing hard to the ground. Dust rose, and the crowd erupted with shouts of shock. The leader barked angrily, his eyes wide with fury. He sent two more forward, this time circling to flank the human. Their blades shone as they closed in. The human adjusted his stance, his eyes calm, his breath steady. The moment they struck, he ducked low, letting one blade swing harmlessly over his head. With a sharp twist of his foot, he swept the other guard's legs out from under him. Both attackers fell hard, groaning as their weapons clattered away. The crowd gasped again, louder this time. The whispers grew into shouts. He stood against them. He beat them back. People pushed closer, their fear beginning to crack into something new. Something dangerous for the enforcers. Hope. The leader hesitated now. His soldiers, trained to dominate, were lying bruised and broken on the stones. A single man, an outsider, was holding them back without armor, without even a proper weapon. His hands trembled, but his pride forced him forward. Enough! He roared. He leveled his spear and charged straight at the human. The strike came fast, faster than the others, aimed true at the human's heart. For a heartbeat, time slowed. The mother let out a cry. The crowd fell silent, and even the child stirred in her arms. The human tilted to the side at the last instant, the spear grazing his jacket but missing flesh. With one swift motion, he grabbed the shaft, yanked it forward, and used the leader's own momentum to drive him into the ground. The spear snapped under the force, leaving the leader coughing in the dust. The human stood tall once more, the broken pieces of the spear in his hands. He looked at the crowd, then at the mother and child. His chest rose and fell steadily, his face calm, though his eyes burned with fire. The people stared at him in awe. For years they had lived in silence, bowing their heads in fear. Now they watched someone stand tall. The leader groaned, trying to lift himself, but the human pressed the broken spear shaft to his throat, not piercing, just holding it there. The marketplace froze. The guards who remained standing stepped back, uncertain, their courage fading. The crowd leaned in, hearts pounding, breaths held tight. The human finally spoke, his voice low but carrying far. No more starving children, no more broken mothers. You will not stop us from feeding our own. His words struck harder than any blow, and the silence that followed felt alive, charged with something unstoppable. The mother stared at him, her tears falling freely now. For the first time, they were not only tears of fear, they were tears of disbelief, of relief, of hope she had thought long dead. Her child stirred again, looking up with sleepy eyes at the man who had fought for him. His lips curved in the faintest smile, crumbs still at the corners of his mouth. The human lowered the spear from the leader's throat and let the broken shaft fall to the ground. The sound echoed like a drumbeat. He didn't need the weapon anymore. The message was already clear. The crowd erupted, their voices finally breaking free. Some cheered, others shouted, and some simply wept. The guards who were still able to stand dragged their leader away, their heads lowered, no longer proud. For the first time in the marketplace's history, the enforcers retreated. The human stood in the center of the square, silent, the people's cries swirling around him like a storm. He did not raise his hands to claim victory, nor smile at what he had done. He simply looked at the mother and her child again, as if reminding himself why he had chosen this path. And as the people's voices grew louder, carrying through the streets beyond, one truth became clear. This act was no longer just defiance. It was the beginning of something greater, something no one could stop. The market square was still buzzing with voices when the first rumors began to spread. The guards had been beaten back, their leader humiliated, and the humans still stood tall in the center of the stones. The people could not believe it. Mothers clutched their children tighter. Fathers whispered to each other with fire in their eyes, and merchants who once kept their heads down now leaned over their stalls, watching with sharp interest. Something had shifted. The mother who had begged for food pressed her child close against her chest. Her heart was racing, and her mind screamed at her to run before more soldiers arrived. Yet her legs would not move. Her eyes stayed fixed on the human. She had seen others try to resist before, and every time the punishment was swift and brutal. But now, this man had done the impossible. The guards had fallen, not him. The crowd was not silent anymore. The whispers grew louder, turning into voices. One man near the back shouted, "He stood for her, for the child." Another cried out, "He gave food. He gave food to the hungry." Others echoed it, the chant rising higher. "Food for the hungry. Food for the hungry." It was not yet organized, but it was powerful. The words bounced off the walls, carried by every trembling voice that had long been silent. The human bent down to his crate of rations. He pulled out another piece of bread and held it high so all could see. The crowd fell silent, watching, breathless. He looked at the woman beside him, then at the faces in the crowd, and finally, he tossed the bread toward the nearest child who sat weak and thin against a wall. The bread landed softly in her lap, and she stared at it as if it were gold. Her mother gasped and grabbed it quickly, breaking it into pieces and shoving them into the little girl's hands. The silence broke. People surged forward, some timidly at first, others with desperate cries. Hungry faces, hollow eyes, hands reaching, not for wealth or power, but for food. The guards who remained conscious tried to bark orders, shouting at the people to back away, but their voices no longer carried fear. The people ignored them. Their eyes were locked on the human, on the crate, on the hope he had just opened. The human didn't hesitate. He tore open the crate fully and began pulling out rations one by one, handing them directly into the hands of the nearest families. The crowd pressed closer, their fear melting under hunger and a new boldness. Children cried with joy as food touched their lips, some too weak to chew quickly, nibbling slowly as their parents wept. For the first time in years, the market did not echo with commands or whips. It echoed with the sound of eating, of relief, of life. The guards, overwhelmed, tried to push through the crowd to stop him. But something had changed. Fathers who once lowered their heads now stepped forward, blocking the path of the soldiers. Mothers raised their voices, shouting curses and defiance. Even the merchants, long afraid of losing their place, moved their stalls forward, forming barriers of wood and cloth between the guards and the human. The enforcers were trapped, cut off by the very people they had ruled for so long. Their shouts turned to panic as stones, sticks, and even scraps of broken tools began to fly at them. The people, weak but many, rose together like a tide. The guards stumbled back, shielding themselves from the sudden fury. In the center of it all, the human continued calmly, passing out food with steady hands. Each ration bar, each crust of bread, each packet of dried fruit he gave away was more than food. It was rebellion, hope, fire. The mother beside him helped now, her fear swallowed by a desperate joy. She broke the food into smaller pieces, making sure every hand that reached out received something. Her child, finally fed, dozed peacefully against her shoulder. The crowd began chanting again, louder this time, voices stronger, hearts pounding. Food for the hungry! Food for the hungry! It rolled like thunder through the streets, reaching even those who were not in the square. People came running from nearby alleys, drawn by the sound, and when they saw the human giving food, they joined in, shouting and raising their fists. The guards, realizing they were outnumbered and overpowered, began to retreat. Some dragged their wounded comrades, others simply fled. The leader who had been thrown to the ground earlier was carried away, his eyes burning with rage, but his face pale with fear. He knew this was no small incident. This was the spark of something greater. The human stood tall once the crate was nearly empty, his hands dusty, his clothes torn. Around him, the people continued cheering, some crying openly, some kneeling in gratitude. He didn't raise his hands to claim victory. He simply looked at them all, his voice cutting through the noise. No one should starve while food rots in the hands of tyrants. The words struck deep. The cheering grew louder, more focused. People began to lift their children onto their shoulders so they too could see the man who had given them hope. The mothers whispered prayers, the fathers clenched their fists, and the children smiled through crumbs. The mother who had first begged sank to her knees once more, but this time it was not in shame. She bowed her head low, pressing her forehead to the ground at the human's feet. "You saved my child," she whispered through her tears. "You saved us all." Others followed, kneeling, bowing, their voices joining hers in thanks. The human shook his head slowly, not accepting their worship. "I only did what should have been done long ago," he said quietly. But his voice carried. and they heard it. They believed it. As the night drew closer, the square did not grow quiet. Fires were lit, not for destruction, but for gathering. Families sat together, sharing the little they had been given. Strangers leaned on each other, united by hunger, by hope, and by the memory of what they had just witnessed. The chant still echoed softly, carried on tired but determined voices. Food for the hungry. Food for the hungry. And though the human stood in silence, watching the people eat, he knew this was only the beginning. The overseers would not ignore this. They would come with anger, with punishment. But he also knew something powerful had been born tonight. The people had tasted not only food, but freedom. And once tasted, it could never be forgotten. The fires in the square had burned low when the sound of heavy boots echoed through the streets. The celebration ended at once. Parents pulled their children close, merchants shut their stalls, and frightened whispers spread. The overseers had arrived. Unlike the guards, these were not simple enforcers with spears. These were armored soldiers, taller, stronger, carrying weapons of steel and plasma. Their helmets glowed faintly, their steps heavy like thunder. The crowd shrank back, forming tight groups. Fear returned like a cold wind, chilling the hope that had filled the square only hours ago. The mother clutched her child, trembling as she tried to blend into the shadows. Her boy, finally fed and no longer weak, clung to her neck, whispering, "Mama, don't be afraid. The human will protect us." His small voice was steady, but her heart ached at the innocence of his belief. The overseers marched in with sharp precision. At their front walked a tall commander, his armor black with golden edges, his face hidden behind a mask of steel. His voice, when it came, rolled like distant thunder. "Who dares defy the order? Who feeds beggars in open sight? Step forward, or all will suffer." His words carried death. The people bowed their heads, some sobbing softly, others trembling too hard to stand. The human stood slowly, stepping into the open. He had no armor, no weapon, except his will. Dust clung to his jacket, his hair was messy, and his hands still bore the dirt of broken bread. Yet when he faced the commander, his back was straight, his eyes sharp. He did not kneel, he did not bow. The commander looked him over and let out a short laugh, deep and cruel. "A human? You think you can defy us?" He lifted one gloved hand and gestured at the soldiers behind him. "Take him. Break him in front of them all. Let them see what happens when an outsider plays hero." The soldiers stepped forward, their boots striking in unison, but something unexpected happened. The people did not scatter. They stood frozen, eyes flicking between the human and the soldiers. For years, they had turned away when punishment came. For years, they had hidden their children from the cruelty. But now, they could not move. They could not abandon the man who had stood for them. The mother fell to her knees, clutching her child, tears streaming down her face. She wanted to beg the human to run, to escape, to live. But no words left her lips. She knew he would not run. He had made his choice when he placed bread in her child's hands. The soldiers rushed forward. The human braced himself, gripping a piece of broken wood from the crate. It was not much, only a stick compared to their weapons, but he raised it firmly. The first soldier lunged with a blade, but the human deflected it with a sharp strike, spinning aside. He moved faster than expected, striking at weak points in their armor, dodging their heavy swings. The crowd gasped with every motion, their fear mixing with awe. Still, there were too many. For every soldier he knocked back, two more pressed forward. A strike grazed his arm, burning his skin. Blood trickled, and the people cried out. Another blow knocked him to one knee, but he forced himself back up, sweat and blood running down his face. His chest heaved, but his eyes burned brighter with each attack. The commander watched, his laughter echoing. "You see?" he roared to the crowd. "He is nothing. He is human, weak, broken." He lifted his hand again, signaling his soldiers to finish it. But before they could, a voice rose from the crowd, trembling, cracked, but strong enough to cut through the night. "He is not weak. He fed my child." The mother's voice echoed across the square. All eyes turned to her. She stood now, her child in her arms, her face streaked with tears but her back straight. "He gave us hope when you gave us nothing." The crowd stirred, whispers rippling like fire through dry grass. More voices rose. "He fed us. He stood against them. He fights for us." The soldiers paused, uneasy. The human, bloodied but still standing, looked at the people. His lips curved into the faintest smile. The commander snarled, sensing his control slipping. Silence them, he ordered. The soldiers raised their weapons, preparing to strike into the crowd. But the people did not move back this time. A father stepped forward, holding a rusted tool like a weapon. A merchant grabbed a wooden pole from his stall. Mothers shielded their children but did not retreat. For the first time, the people of the market did not bow. They stood. The human straightened, his broken weapon still in hand. His voice, hoarse but strong, carried above the chaos. If you want me, you'll have to go through all of them. He gestured to the crowd, and the people roared as one, their voices shaking the air. The overseers hesitated. They were strong, trained, and armed, but they were outnumbered. The crowd had grown into hundreds, and behind every face was rage that had slept too long. The commander's golden mask tilted slightly as he studied the human. For the first time, doubt flickered in his stance. The standoff stretched, tense and silent, until finally the commander raised his hand. Enough, he growled. He pointed at the human. This is not finished. You will pay for this. All of you will pay. He turned sharply, and his soldiers followed, retreating into the dark streets. The people exhaled as one, relief and disbelief flooding them. Then cheers erupted, louder than before, shaking the walls of the square. Children laughed through tears, parents hugged one another, and strangers embraced as if they were family. The human stood in the center, bloodied but unbroken, and watched the people rise. The mother approached, her child still clinging to her. She knelt before him, her voice trembling. You saved us again. You gave us more than food. You gave us courage. The child looked at him with wide eyes, whispering softly, You are our protector. The human knelt too, resting a hand gently on the boy's head. His voice was quiet but sure. No, I am only one man, but together you are stronger than all of them. And as the night settled, the people knew the truth. The fight was far from over. The overseers would return with greater fury. But something had been born tonight that could not be undone. Hope had turned into courage, and courage into defiance. The rebellion had begun. The city lay under a heavy silence when night came. The streets, once filled with fear, now hummed with quiet voices gathered in hidden corners. Families who had always hidden their hunger now whispered of freedom. Neighbors who had never dared to speak openly now planned together. The market square, where one act of defiance had set everything in motion, was still marked with broken weapons and scattered crumbs of bread. It was no longer just a place of trade. It had become a symbol. Inside a small, dim shelter on the edge of the square, the mother sat with her child curled against her chest. The boy, finally full, slept peacefully, his small face soft with dreams. She stroked his hair, tears sliding down her cheeks. For the first time in years, they were not tears of despair, but of relief. She looked at the man who sat across from her, the human, his body bruised, his arm wrapped in cloth to stop the bleeding. His face was tired, but his eyes remained sharp, always alert, always listening. She broke the silence, her voice soft but filled with questions she had held back for hours. Why? She asked. Why risk your life for us? For strangers? Her words trembled as if she feared the answer. The human leaned against the wall, his breathing steady. He looked at the sleeping boy, then back at her. Because no child should starve, he said simply. Not when food exists, not when people can help. His words were plain, without pride, without demand. They were the kind of words that struck deeper because of their simplicity. She lowered her head, clutching her child tighter. She wanted to believe him, but her whole life had taught her otherwise. Kindness was rare. Survival meant silence, obedience, and sacrifice. Yet here he was, a man who had given food and faced death without hesitation. She whispered again, almost to herself, They will come back, stronger. They will kill you. The human did not deny it. His gaze turned toward the window, where faint torches burned in the distance as soldiers patrolled. Yes, he said softly, they will come back, but they can't undo what happened today. They can't unfeed your child. They can't erase the moment the people stood. The mother fell quiet, her heart torn between hope and fear. She wanted to cling to the safety of silence, but deep inside, a spark had already been lit. She could feel it in her chest, burning against years of despair. Outside, the city was stirring. People were meeting in secret, trading stories of what they had seen. A merchant told how the human had fought off guards with nothing but a broken stick. A father spoke of the way his child smiled for the first time in months while chewing stolen bread. A grandmother whispered that this was the sign they had been waiting for. The spark had spread into every home, every heart. But with hope came danger. The overseers, furious at their defeat, had gathered in their fortress. Soldiers lined the streets, more heavily armed than before. Orders were given: find the human, crush him, and make the people watch. They believed fear could still be restored with blood. The human knew this. He had seen the way empires worked, how cruelty always returned to claim power. But he also knew something had changed tonight. The people no longer looked at the ground when soldiers passed. They looked at each other. They nodded. They whispered. They planned. That was power. The mother broke the silence again. You can't fight them all alone. Her voice was stronger this time, less pleading, more certain. She looked at him with wet eyes, determination hiding behind her tears. But maybe we don't have to stay silent anymore. The human met her gaze, and for the first time, she saw him smile. Not a smile of victory, but of recognition. He nodded slowly. It starts with one, but it never ends with one. Suddenly, a knock rattled against the wooden door of the shelter. The mother stiffened, pulling her child closer. The human stood, every muscle tensing, his hand gripping the broken spear propped beside him. Another knock, louder this time, followed by a hurried whisper. Open up! It's safe! We need to talk! He opened the door to find 3 figures standing outside. A merchant, a farmer, and a young woman who had once worked in the kitchens of the overseers. Their faces were determined, their eyes filled with fire. The merchant spoke first, his voice firm. We're with you. We saw what you did. The people are ready. They just need someone to lead. The farmer nodded, holding up a rusted farming tool like a weapon. We've had enough of starving while they feast. The young woman stepped forward, her voice trembling but brave. We can hide you. We can spread your words. They won't silence us again. The human looked at them, then at the mother, then at the sleeping child. His chest tightened with the weight of responsibility. He had not come to be a leader. He had not planned to start a rebellion. All he had done was feed a hungry child. But sometimes the smallest act breaks the strongest chains. He stepped aside, letting them enter, and closed the door behind them. Inside the shelter, plans began to form. Whispers turned to promises. Promises turned to vows. The people were no longer just afraid. They were ready. The mother sat quietly, rocking her child, but her ears caught every word. For the first time, she did not feel alone in her suffering. She was part of something larger, something dangerous but powerful. Her son stirred in his sleep, his lips forming a soft smile. She kissed his forehead and whispered, "You will grow up in a world where no one begs for scraps. I swear it." The human stood by the window, watching the torchlight outside, his mind sharp, his heart steady. The city was on the edge of change, and he knew the cost would be high. But he also knew this. The overseers could no longer win with fear alone. The people had seen too much. They had tasted hope, and hope, once tasted, was stronger than chains.